16 minutes past 9 Central African time, and we're going to be switching gears now to a very, very important conversation. The genocide in Gaza, it continues to fuel global political tensions, and attention is now turning to one of the world's largest car manufacturers and one of the Middle East's most influential states. Activists and advocacy groups are calling on Qatar, a major shareholder in Volkswagen, to use its influence to oppose the company's reported expansion plans in Israel. Critics are arguing that the businesses should not be expanding operations in Israel while the humanitarian crisis in Gaza continues. A genocide that was bare for the world to see, it's still ongoing. While the other side maintains that commercial decisions should remain separate from political conflicts. Nonsense. I will just put that out of the way. But the debate, I think, raises broader questions about corporate responsibility, about shareholder influence, and the general role of international businesses during times of crisis. And to help us unpack some of these developments, we're joined by Dr. Ahmed Haroon Jazbhay, lecturer in political sciences at the University of South Africa and also researcher at the Media Review Network. Dr. Jazbhay, always a pleasure. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to News and Views.
Walaikum salam, Saulelo. Shukran for having me.
No, pleasure's all ours, and I want to jump right into it. What exactly has prompted these calls for Qatar to intervene in Volkswagen's plans? And I think most importantly for our listeners who are unfamiliar with the issue, what is the nature of Qatar's relationship with VW?
Qatar, through the Qatari Investment Authority, holds a 17% stake in Volkswagen, and right now there's been an offer on the table for Rafael, which is an Israeli defense manufacturing company that manufactures, primarily the Iron Dome, which used to intercept rockets from the resistance movements in the region. And now this Rafael wants to buy off a struggling VW plant in an area of Germany, the name which is too difficult for me to pronounce, and they want to use this component and in the way save, as they say, 2,300 jobs in VW. But the Qatar Investment Authority has come under severe pressure from activists, civil society, as well as Qataris themselves, who still view any sort of rapprochement with the Zionist entity as a red line within Qatari society. So now there is pushback against this deal to use the plant, to buy off the plant, which Qatar, of course, Qatar will benefit directly, given that it's a 17% shareholder, the third largest shareholder in VW, and it holds, it has two board members, it has voting rights within Volkswagen. So one can understand that those within the economic sphere will say, keep politics and economics separate. We've seen this argument even in South Africa. But at the same time, it is not a simple issue of leaving politics and economics together. You have an entity which builds arms and ammunition for the Zionist entity that is complicit in the genocide of our people in Gaza, the attacks on Iran, on Syria, on Lebanon, those neighboring frontline states that border the Zionist entity. So, of course, there has to be this issue of not benefiting. Qatar shouldn't benefit directly or indirectly from any sort of collaboration with the Zionist entity. So that, in a nutshell, is what the issue at hand is at the moment, and the pressure being faced by QIA to divest from VW and specifically this deal.
Mm. But Doc, how much of that is a reality and is realistic, considering that over the years, particularly since October the 1st, and after the genocide that we saw unfold, there's been a lot that has been said around about quote unquote Muslim countries, or some of the Emirati countries, on how they've responded to the genocide, and how they are essentially have normalized or are seeking to normalize relations with Israel. Is it realistic to expect Qatar to buckle under the pressure of activists and make sure that this deal does not go through?
Realistic or not is neither here or there. We know the Emiratis are in bed, for example, with Israel, because they have hegemonic aspirations to overtake Saudi Arabia as the hegemon in the Middle East, and they view rapprochement with the Zionist entity and America as a way in which to get that sort of hegemonic, to realize the hegemonic aspiration. Qatar is a little bit different. Qatar hosts Hamas, it hosts Islamic Jihad, it even hosts the Taliban during negotiations with the United States. So it has this back channel, it serves as a back channel mediator between Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Zionist entity. Every sort of ceasefire, however fragile you want to refer to it, has gone through Qatar. And so Qatar has that existing relationships. And they sort of want to play both sides. They're trying to appease their own populations. They're trying to appease, the global ummah. At the same time, they want to, normalize relationships. But they've made it very clear that, normalization will only come after the establishment of the 67 border state and whatever, for whatever that's worth, diplomatically and so on. But they realize that there is pressure on it. If pressure didn't work, Bin Salman would have jumped into bed with the Zionist entity before October 7th. And now that October 7th happened, the normalization with the Zionist entity is off the table in Saudi society. Okay, and the same in Qatar. So pressure does work in different ways. Maybe not directly, maybe not, but indirectly. We've seen that the pressure does work. In the case of Qatar, it's a much smaller state and so on, but economically it's quite powerful. And one thing about these Gulf Arab states and the GCC state is that they invest a lot of money in perception. And even amongst their own populations, the perception that they're on the side of the Palestinians. However, we know realistically that is true to a very limited extent. But they won't go further and jump into bed with Israel because they know the backlash, the domestic backlash that will have, and the backlash in the region. So they are receptive to pressure to some extent. They'll find some fancy excuses. Really, they'll employ some big PR companies to spin it. But at the end of the day, they are receptive to certain pressures from civil society, from their own populations, and from the region as a whole. They resisted pressure from Donald Trump for normalization in Israel, with Israel in exchange for a ceasefire in Iran. The GCC countries resisted that, but rather, there is this idea that pressure can bear some results. And it will be see whether in the weeks to come, whether they've gone through this deal, whether they found some sort of creative ways to buy behind this deal, via shell companies and so on, or whether they've gone all in. And I think at the moment there's a lot of pressure in the region, around the world, not to invest. And so what we can do is to keep on pressurizing, ensure that this issue gains the necessary traction, because when it goes out of the media space, that is when the media news cycle moves on. That is when they will may quietly go ahead with this deal. So it's important to sustain the pressure. So it does work, but it works to a limited extent. and you are not successful in all at all times and at all angles.
Mm, mm. I want to come to the conversation around divestment, boycotts. It's been, I think, at the center of particularly this conversation around the genocide and Israel's continued siege on Palestine. How does this fit into the broader conversation on BDS and just general corporate behavior? And we've also seen, corporates and multinationals becoming quite powerful over the years, even more powerful than some states, one can mention. Is there still space for BDS to be one of the tools to enforce that kind of change? Is there still an understanding from citizens from all across the world that your money essentially is where the buck stops, and that's where you can influence decisions taken by countries and these multinationals? Because it's almost disheartening, especially here in South Africa, when you find out that we are now the leading coal exporter to Israel, for instance. You still walk around in malls and shopping centers and you still see people in McDonald's wearing K-Way apparel, and you're like, is there an understanding? Is BDS still a mode that we can use to enforce change as ordinary citizens? And do people understand that, or multinationals and corporations have just become too powerful and too big to feel the pinch of such quote unquote little actions from the ordinary men and women on the ground?
Salelo, you touched on many issues, and I hope I can address every one of them. If BDS was not effective, then Cape Union Mart would not be taking the Palestine Solidarity Campaign to court. This is a very important case for freedom of expression and the right to protest and so on. If Philip Krautz felt that BDS was useless, he would not take BDS to court. This case is being viewed by the so-called Friends of Israel and its supporters in this country as a landmark case. If they are successful, BDS gets a knock, a severe knock. But corporates, understand this, and which is why there is a pushback. If there was no pushback, I would say BDS has no effect on it. But the fact that there is a pushback by Cape Union Mart shows that they worry and they understand the power of boycott and divestment and sanctions. I mean, I know it's disheartening. You go into a masjid for Jummah, and now we're in winter, and you just a cursory glance will see there are many people who carry jackets on. But at the same time, and we know many people are not going to this camp, but they're ordering online. This sort of things. So it can be disheartening, but it's important to understand that you are never going to get total victories via BDS. It's not the silver bullet, but it's one tool in the resistance arsenal. Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Islamic Republic of Iran are fighting the physical war on the ground. What we can do as citizens, as ethical citizens, is do our best to avoid certain brands, like you mentioned McDonald's, you mentioned there's Discam, there's Clover, Cape Union Mart, brands that myself personally I've avoided for the last 15 years. So it's never going to be a perfect scenario, but these issues have they take time to fester, and if they were not successful, we wouldn't see the slap suits against the PSC and PSC, and maybe even other solidarity organizations in the future. So it's very easy to become despondent, but at the same time, we must understand out there that it is not the silver bullet, but one tool in the arsenal. It's what we can do as citizens that support the cause. That there is going to be double standards and a sort of hypocrisy in our, because many will say there's Israeli chips in our cell phones and so on. So there is going to be a certain level of double standards, but we mustn't become so consumed by this that we decide, it's free for all. Or so that's why we call for targeted sanctions. There's certain easy hits, there's alternative to Discam. There's alternative to Clover. There's alternative to Cape Union Mart and the Kiwi brand. Yes, it's it's very popular, but there are alternative measures. So it's easy to go into despondency, but at the same time, if PDS was not effective, we wouldn't see the slap suits against the like of PSC and others in the time to come.
No, most definitely, Dr. Jazbhay. Always a pleasure having you on Salam Media, and thank you so much for that important conversation. Really appreciate it.
Shukran for having me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed Haroon Jazbhay, lecturer in political science at UNISA and researcher at the Media Review Network, helping us unpack this complex involving issue. Really appreciate his analysis and his time this morning. Always a pleasure chatting to him and getting his wonderful insights. I'm going to take a quick break. News and views. We'll be back with you after this.